University of Edinburgh. I suppose I would ask Rich and Anna, is there anything about the child protection system that you think is good and should be kept, or is it about just doing away with it all?
Okay, maybe to get a couple more questions and then just to
yeah, there's another one from Edinburgh University, I'm afraid. For me, the challenge seems to be the dominant tendency for an exclusive and singular focus on children. We've got some 300 indicators for well-being of children, and we don't have any at all. We don't have a getting it right for every family. And for me, that's a huge challenge, I think, for us here in Scotland.
I'm Tricia, I'm not from the University of Edinburgh. I run for the British Association of Social Work with the Scottish arm. And just a bit about moral distress for social work, because following the adoption inquiry which passed the Commission, we did quite a lot of work, raising workers, with social workers on what would work for them in these scenarios. And what we often get back is the economic argument that local authorities can't afford to employ more workers. But what people forget is that the majority of social workers last about 7 or 8 years, and then they do what Sally Ann did, what I've done. They think, you know what, I can only beat my head against this wall for so long, I'm going to go into the third sector, or I'll do something completely different. And yet, we have projects. There was one incident not so long ago of a very busy team in Glasgow, where a brave team manager just put the woman who was about to go and said, I've had enough, in a community for 1 day a week. That woman says, I've had a new lease of life. I now want to stay in the work. So we developed that into a proposal to chief social work officers who all cheer, because the majority of them had all done community social work 100 years ago. But there is no support to make that into a full-time project from government. We already do that, is what we go back. And I actually think that bit about social workers want to do the work, that that very often gets talked about. There's a huge disconnect between sometimes what people perceive the social workers to be wanting to do and what they actually want to do.
Okay, so 3 questions, comments there. One, issues around, I'm trying to read now, I'm writing now.
Is there anything you like about
anything good about the current child protection system that's good? An issue around, we have indicators for children, but not around wider for around families. Is that something that we need? And finding that issue, too often said we can't afford to do this, but actually with a little bit of investment, there's good practice examples there of where we can involves, give social workers the kind of experience that they need to kind of stay in the system. Wanting to come in?
I can start, yeah. I mean, we do think that some children do need to be protected, particularly from serious physical abuse, from sexual abuse, but I think we need to be clear about what's been done before, about what support services are put in, about what help's offered, about how relationships are maintained within the care system. So I think, it is also, it's not about all children have to remain at home at any cost by any means. I've worked as an independent practitioner in the family courts for 30 years in London. I wouldn't have survived if I had that view. There are children, but I think it is about which children, who, when and what supports, and how we work with families and communities before we get to that stage. Yeah.
It was maybe more about the system.
Oh.
So I'm not questioning the
Okay.
All
right. No, I
think
think
about the aspects of the system, or whether or not we need a blank sheet.
Okay, from a personal point of view, and it might be quite controversial in Scotland, so good for debate. I do work in the family courts. I actually think having lawyers represent families is a really quite an important part and very important, useful thing about the English system. Yeah, I don't think the 26 weeks is, but we won't go there.
So and then back to Breeden.
Yeah, because I'm part of the leadership programme. We also have lawyers in children's hearings, just as a matter of fact. And there's a debate there about how good it is for the child or otherwise. But that's an interesting one. But there is about that fundamentally is about representation, isn't it, and understanding and people's rights being respected. In terms of the current child protection system, I worked in the current child protection system in Scotland for a long time as a child protection social worker, as somebody who chaired case conferences. I think there are many parts of our approach that are very positive in terms of in the best places with the best practice where people take a really clear relationship focused approach. The difficulty we've got, I think, is a lack of consistency across the country, and one of my fears as somebody who is in the national leadership team is that I don't think we're having a robust enough discussion about models and what that might mean for us. I think what we're doing is we're actually just talking about incremental improvements to the current system, including how we engage quite radically differently with children and families in that system, without actually fundamentally asking whether in fact a different approach is what we need. And actually one of the things that I've been thinking about over the last few days after reading the book and just some of the other people that I've been speaking to is actually how do I take responsibility and actually bring this conversation into that room and actually try and provoke a conversation about, we can tweak systems and processes till we're blue in the face. But actually it's the interface, the relationships, the trust and the courage that actually protects children and communities, not necessarily any system that we put in place.
Well, as you know, John, the deaths of babies is in long-term decline. We seem to be really good at protecting. I know that still, unfortunately, children die, but it's a tiny, tiny group now of babies that die. So I think we're good at protecting babies. I also think that there is some very, I think that with all its faults, the language of children's rights is really important and has made a huge difference in terms of opening up possibilities for conversations. And I can't go into it now, but there are local authorities that I know of that are incredibly, who are working really hard within the current system, using restorative approaches, for example. I really love some of the stuff that Leeds is doing, and I know it reasonably well. So it's not just a brand. So no, I mean we have to kind of rush today, but and we give examples all over the place, and we work with local authorities all over the place to change things within the system. But I think if we were, it's like the guy from Cork, then he's asked for directions. He says, if you're asked for directions and you want to go to Dublin, and he says, oh, I wouldn't start from here. And so I'd start from a different place. But
I don't know if any of you had kind of more. I think there was another question around do we have the right indicators to measure what we're achieving in terms of children and family well-being? We've been very focused on children rather than wider families. I think I got the question right.
I suppose it kind of gets back to the fundamental point of what kind of country we want to live in and create, and whether in fact measurement in and of itself will be helpful to our people. So I do think that one of the things about GIRFEC is that actually if you wanted to, you could use it and apply it across the whole human population if you wanted to. I think what we have is, and why it's emerged in the way that it's emerged, is we have a fragmented approach to supporting human beings in our society, so that children are seen as different wee entities to adults, to older people, so we are quite fragmented. We have got the National Performance Framework, which is very high level, very strategic. I suppose if I'm honest, what I would want to do, if I was have to prioritise my resource, is actually to get some money into the very earliest help and support and networks of support that families need in communities. Because actually, it's at the risk of sounding as if I'm oversimplifying this, it's kind of common sense what we all need to live good, thriving lives. And if we made and put the conditions in place within communities for that to happen, do we need a separate framework? I'm not sure. It's a bit bureaucratic for me, I think, but that might be very unpopular.
Thank you. I know there's a couple more questions out there. Maggie, is there someone else? There's about I see.
I just wanted to respond to Trish. Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
yeah. I wanted to respond to your point, Trish, about social work, because one of the things, with all its faults, that we've been doing through the teaching partnerships, because we have now, universities have to work with employers, and what we've really established is that, you know, there's been very restricted routes for social workers. If they get tired and they've had enough for the moment, they end up having to go into management or leave. And so through the teaching partnerships, we've been trying to develop PQ and CPD possibilities so they can become practice educators, so they can have some space to think about and to do small pieces of research with us. Doesn't mean leaving the profession. I mean, personally, I don't understand why we don't have sabbaticals for social workers. I don't understand why we don't give them study leave, we don't give them time out to think about things and to study an area of their practice and stuff. I think that should be embedded, actually.
Thank you. So, Maggie, and Sheila, and so we're going to take again 3 questions and bring it back to the audience.
Yeah, I'm going to stand up because I couldn't hear people at the front talking. I think your voice gets taken away. I'm Maggie Mellon, and I'm here today as a part of a group of parents and independent social workers who are, it's called Parent Advocacy and Rights. If you want to read a really good magazine, it's on our website. It's now in its 2nd edition, and it's the Voices of Parents. The question, or the thing I wanted to say or ask was, I think that child protection isn't the right story. I think it's the wrong story. We've come here today and it's a book about child protection, and all we've talked about is poverty. So that's not the actual child protection of child abuse and sexual abuse of children, which Rich mentioned. That is legitimate child protection, but is child protection the right story for what we've been talking about? Poverty, family support. Parent advocacy and rights is, I mean, I really appreciated what Claire said, and Sally Ann as well, but Claire said family rights in the UN Convention. Rights are against the state. They're not actually between family members. The UN Convention rights are families' rights in this against the state. And I think Gary's point about getting it out for every family. Why don't we have that? Why is it getting it out for every child? We want it out for every family, but we have no problem. So I suppose that's the thing I wanted to say. I think child protection is the wrong story, it's the old story. 100 years ago, the NSPCC of Britain fought to have a law to criminalise parents for not having a fire guard for their children and for not having a separate plot for their children. And the answer, I mean, that actually got passed. It's ridiculous because the parents were too poor to afford a fire guard. But that was the child protection story at the time. We were going to protect children. Why are we still telling that story? There's a whole separate story to be won. So I just think why I would like to banish the term child protection and really relegate it to the police's responsibility to investigate crimes against children in the same way as they investigate crimes against adults. Please read our magazine and please contribute.
Thank you. Challenging thought. Sheila?
I just wanted to come back on the subject of measurement, Sally Ann. I mean, speaking from an organisation that has traditionally applied the measures that we have to show we're effective, we've looked at the parents and their sense of how well they're coping or not. And we've just been ruled out of a programme that can't be invested in because our primary indicators are not children's outcomes. And you know, how fragmented can that be? It's ridiculous. But on the subject of your common sense argument, and we don't actually have to rely on common sense. I mean, there are numerous excellent pieces, but I sat on the Oxfam Humankind Index steering group, a fantastic and really robust and wide piece of scoping about what people in Scotland thought they needed to live a decent life, and that's not that out of date. You know, a few years ago, I worked on a similar piece of work around people with learning disabilities. And hey, guess what? They wanted the same things as we want to have to live a good life. You know, there's so much evidence out there, and it's so weird that we get locked into box marks. Oh, well, actually, we need to go and do test that, or do some evidence gathering around that. And actually, we've just got so much. And so the ingredients for the story are there. The story that moves it away from child protection to what is a quality of life that enables families to raise children that flourish is there. I mean, we all will ask the parents we work with again and again because you need to refresh and update and not assume you know it all. But we do have a fantastic evidence base for what needs to change for people to have what they would consider to be a life in which their children can flourish.
Okay.
Sorry about listening. I think great. This is absolutely fabulous. I think we've been around. I mean, I was just being social work, and I luckily changed to an education post, but took on a parent and family support team, and we have a social model across the whole of Stirling Council. But in terms of some of the stuff that's been discussed today about that early help and that early intervention, we're not putting in our money. I've been lucky enough to get a project where we're really doing that, and we're really seeing benefit. And I worked in social work, I worked in child protection, I worked in frontline intake team, and you would see families and there was poverty. They were getting fed in from a school. It was, these wider social determinants and there was nowhere to go. So now it's that bit where we've got that intervention service where families are not getting escalated up. They get that support at that really early level. We look at parents. Parents, I mean, we could call us, I wouldn't want to be family support, but parents and family support. Because children's needs and rights need to be at the centre in their development, everything we do. We can't do that if we don't support parents and carers and around them. So, I mean, it's been an exciting kind of journey over the last 2 years with this team. And because we're in education, we don't really understand the social model, we get to kind of shape it to, we need to, because they'll get asked questions like what you do about family learning. Well, we're actually, we're looking at some of the deprivation first, we get food on the table, we're looking at securing the house, and maybe they might be in a place, to do some family learning.
Thank you. Some really thoughtful insights and comments there. We are in time to ask for kind of reflections back from the panel, particularly kind of ask to reflect back, but think about what's now needed next in terms of how do we move towards a more holistic model of family support that is poverty aware and sees the needs of the family as a whole within the reality of the structural inequalities that Scotland faces. Sally Ann.
Yeah, just in response to that, I mean, I do fundamentally believe that poverty is, and overcoming poverty for many families can be a game changer, but it's not a magic bullet, and it can never be that. And I would, as I said in what I was speaking, I would always be very suspicious of anything that was presented as such. So what we need is a poverty-aware lens when we're working across the public sector. But we also need to be trauma responsive, because we have, the beauty of the ACE studies is that they give us at a whole population level a sense of the potential adversity that people have experienced in their population. And actually, that should be enough to tell us that we need to think about doing things differently, that actually we need to think about how we construct our responses to people who seek help or who we go to offer help. Because that response needs to be compassionate, it needs to be emotionally intelligent, it needs to be where that person is, and it should. And one of my issues with the programme approach, again, is that they are presented as silver bullets, and many of their families live in very complex, difficult situations where they have learned not to trust, and they have learned to basically exist in their fear response quite on an everyday basis for probably good reasons. And what we need to do is actually hone our skills as human beings to be able to authentically support families in a way where they can come to us and trust us to actually support them to put their solutions in place that will help their families heal and survive. And that for me actually sounds quite straightforward, but if you think about how we've constructed some of our public services, they are clinical, they are cold, they lack compassion, and there is a fundamental shift that is required that says that actually you're welcome over that door rather than you're seen as different, please don't come near us, because see your distress that you're displaying. We don't see it as distress, we see it as risk, we see it as aggression, and we see it as a threat. And we need to overcome that quite fundamentally. So it's both. We can't have one without the other, as far as I'm concerned.
Sorry?
Just a quick point, which is Scotland's actually got the highest rate of children coming into care in the whole of UK. People have said the opposite today. It's actually got the highest rate.
That's the TWRP.
Reflections on the comments, and also just where next? How do you take this forward in terms of making a new story?
I suppose part of the reflections is, I wish you had a warmer climate, because I might move up. It's just a bit too, not today, but actually it sounds, coming down south of Derby, London, unfortunately I can't move, but I just, there are some positive things. You're talking about child poverty, you're talking about the UNCRC, you talk about family poverty, that would be one change, not just the Child Poverty Act, the Family Poverty Act. But, you're talking about the UNCRC in different ways, from I think the Children's Commissioner in England is a very protection-focused, looking at and participation to less extent, but not the promotional stuff. So I think that, there is, you have dialogue with your government, we don't. Not surprisingly, they don't really want to talk to us, the DFE or anyone else for that matter in that department. I think, build on the strengths. I'd really like to, what you were talking about sounds really interesting. So there are positive things, but I think there obviously are lots of changes that are needed as well. But I think, with all of us together, it's about trying to talk, trying to change things. And, and I think that's the main thing, yeah.
Thank you very much. Bruce?
I think we're in a real mess as a society. I think, and maybe it's because I live in England and I'm working in England, but we are in a mess there. We have really growing inequality, massive lack of trust in our institutions, people who are very angry, very fractured communities, and I see what's happening in child protection as part of a much bigger picture, actually. I do think that we're at a moment of real crisis, but it might be a moment of opportunity as well. But I think what's happening around Brexit and what's happening around, living in the north of England and knowing all the areas around that voted to leave, knowing what's happened to them over the years of the miners' strike and all those communities being closed and all that kind of thing. So to cut a long story short, I think that we have an opportunity to rethink how we build a better social settlement. I think, and this is glib, but it's the only way I can make sense of it, is I think we have to think global and act local. I'm doing lots of little bits and pieces in local communities with local authorities. I agree with Anna, we have a bit of a trouble with our government, but we might get a different one. We might have more hope with them. I don't know. I might have no government, but God knows what might happen to us actually. I really don't know what might. Anyway, to cut a long story short, there are challenges on a range of levels, but crucially, I think we need to keep talking to each other, and I really wanted to emphasise what I agree with Taliana about. I'm troubled by the split between people who talk about structural inequality and people who talk about ACEs. I think we should be able to integrate those conversations. I think it's really important that we respect each other. And this will really show my age. When I was in the late 70s, early 80s, I was very active on the far left in London. And do you know what? Do you know who we really hated? The other far left groups. We didn't even post about the Tories. We ignored Margaret Thatcher whilst we went on and on about the bloody Socialist Workers' Party. I think we're in danger of getting a little to that here, and that we need to talk to each other. We all care about the well-being and flourishing of children, and we all do believe as well that where possible, that should be within the well-being and flourishing of families. That's me.
I won't say very much. I'll say thank you for coming, and for really stimulating discussion, which I hope will go on into the reception. I suppose I would say two things. One is that I think protecting children rather than child protection is actually about supporting families. And it's about what Gary said, but it has got to be something that's not meaningless. I remember quite a long time ago, when England had Every Child Matters, and then they had Every Disabled Child Matters, and then they had Every Family Matters. And gradually it got more and more diluted until it became meaningless. I don't know whether we need the indicators, but what we definitely need to do is listen to families, talk to families. And again, I remember a bit like you talking, back in the 80s, and it's sort of Glasgow City Council and Liverpool City Council. and Derek Hatton saying, we talk to families. And whoever it was from Glasgow said, well, the difference is we don't just talk to families, we listen to families. And I think that's what we need to do.
A very clear point to finish on. Just to finish by thanking all our speakers, our panel members, particularly to Preet and Anna coming up and talking about the book. I've learned a huge amount today. It's been perfectly obvious that my background isn't social work, my expertise isn't this area of working with children and families. But I've learned a huge amount. I've been shocked by some of what I've heard in terms of the lack of awareness of poverty and underlying inequalities and how that impacts on children and families, but also hugely heartened by clearly the desire in this room to think about how the wider poverty and discrimination and structural issues that families face needs to be taken into account if we're really going to be able to support every family, support every child, and protect children in that widest possible sense, and get government thinking about what needs to be in place to protect families and enable families to flourish. That's the end of our formal discussion.